The Lawhill was quite a famous ship, being as she was one of the last of her kind. Ships like the Lawhill are considered by historians to have represented the pinnacle of sailing technology, and by a combination of strength, carrying capacity, and economy of operation, they did not easily yield their place on the world's oceans to the steamships and oil burners of the newer era. The ship was nicknamed the Lucky Lawhill, quite apt for such a vulnerable vessel, which managed to survive both world wars, during which scores of ships, including many old sailors, were sent to the bottom by torpedo, bomb, and gunfire. Lawhill was built at the Caledon Shipbuilding and Engineering Company yard of W.B. Thompson in Dundee, Scotland, and launched on 24th of August 1892. And she was named after the Law, a hill in the middle of Dundee. Lawhill had been ordered by shipowner Charles Berry for the jute trade, but only made 2 voyages carrying jute before the business became unprofitable, and shifted to other cargoes. Lawhill was a steel-hulled four-masted barque rigged in jubilee or baldheaded fashion, that is without royal sails over the top-gallant sails, active in the early part of the 20th century. Although her career was not especially remarkable, save perhaps for being consistently profitable as a cargo carrier, in the 1930s, Richard Cookson went on board and extensively documented Lawhill's internals and construction, which was later published in the Anatomy of the Ship series. The Lawhill was built to the highest class of Lloyd's Register and retained her class until her name was deleted from that register in 1957. The steel used in her construction was Siemens Martin mild steel, manufactured by Wallside, Lanarkshire Steel Co., and the Consett and Moore Steel and Iron Co. Lawhill had a length between perpendiculars of 307 feet, molded breadth of 44 feet 9 inches, and molded depth of 26 feet. The hull was constructed of steel plates 14 feet long, but varying in width and thickness, laid in regular in and out strakes, all butt-lapped except for the sheer strake, which was the widest and was butt-strapped throughout its length. From the watertight collision bulkhead to the stern, the hull was one huge warehouse divided into 2 decks, the only obstruction to stowage being the pillars, hatches for loading, and space required for freshwater tanks. Any collision damage to the hull aft of the collision bulkhead was often fatal. During her long career, Lawhill's color scheme changed several times. When launched, she was painted light gray to the load waterline, white to the light waterline, and either red or green below. At a later date, the white band disappeared, and the hull was painted red from the load waterline down. It remained like this until the early 1930s, when Ericsson had her painted in the traditional livery of most of his ships, namely black above the load waterline, white to the light waterline, and red below. Upper strakes at the forecastle, midship bridge, and poop were also painted white. Except for a period during the Second World War from 1939 to 1941, she retained this color scheme to the end. For that short period during the war, until her requisition, she carried amidships painted Finnish flags and the words Lawhill and Finland in bold white letters, hopefully indicating her neutrality to marauding U-boats. During the 1890s, a demand was developing for kerosene in the Far East, which could be more efficiently carried by sail at the time, and on August 31st, 1899, Lawhill was sold to the Lawhill Sailing Ship Co. Limited, London, together with her sister ship Judiopolis. Captain John C.B. Jarvis of Dundee, inventor of the eponymous brace winch, was given command of the ship September 1st, 1899, January 21st, 1911. In June 1900, the barque was transferred to the Anglo-American Oil Company. In the big Lawhill, Captain Jarvis had a ship after his own heart, for she was full of gadgets. She was a clumsy-looking ship with a very square rig, without royals, and her steel topmasts were built in one piece with the lower masts. Her top-gallant masts were stepped abaft the topmast heads, instead of on the forepart of them, and this, coupled with her rather squat rig, gave her an ungainly appearance. Her wall sides and not too fine ends made her look a poor sailor too, and her big midship superstructure, which was the same sort of thing the P ships had, further spoiled her appearance in the estimation of sailing ship sailors. Yet she was in fact an excellent ship, a good carrier and a good sailor, and most economical of crew and gear. Those queerly placed top-gallant masts were an American invention, which had been developed by a Bostonian named Forbes to give Mackay's Great Republic double topsails. The idea was that the lower yard was supported from very near the topmast head, and the upper yard, which was supported by a long truss mounted on a strong parrel, was hoisted on the top-gallant mast. This kept the two yards well apart, which was an advantage. It meant, too, that there was only one yard on the top-gallant mast, and so it could be sent up and down very easily without sending any yards down at all. The Lawhill traded a lot to New York, and this handiness was of great value when she was called on to pass under the East River bridges. She made 9 voyages carrying oil and other cargoes. Then the development of storage tank capacity reduced demand, and Lawhill went, again together with her sister ship Jutiopolis, to Geo, Windham & Co. of Liverpool in 1911. Captain J.A. Sanders became her new master. In the year 1914, she was sold to Finnish owner August Troberg, under the command of Captain Edward August Jansen, and Lawhill became Finland's largest sailing ship. Despite the hazards of World War I, Lawhill continued to sail, managing to elude U-boats and arrive unescorted into Brest in May 1917, carrying wheat from Australia. However, French authorities refused to let Lawhill leave, citing the risks, and used her as a store ship. While in port, Lawhill was purchased by another Finn, Gustaf Eriksson, but before she could get to sea, Finland became an ally of Germany, and in June 1918, the French government officially requisitioned Lawhill. The French started to convert Lawhill to a motor ship, but after much protest, Eriksson finally got her back in January 1919, and under the command of Captain Karl Reuben de Clue, she resumed carrying wheat, first from Argentina, then from Australia again, as well as timber and other cargoes. The author Alan Villiers served on Lawhill until injured off Port Lincoln in a fall from the yardarm in 1922. On the 1st of October 1932, she rammed and sank Polish steamer SS Niemen in Kattegat. As for the trial of Captain Arthur A. Soderlund, the Lawhill master, he was found not guilty. Richard Brinsley Sheridan graphically described his 10 months in the ship during her 1933-34 voyage to Australia, when he published his book, Heavenly Hell: The Experiences of an Apprentice in a Four-Mast Barque. After 20 years of steady service as a grain carrier, Lawhill was arrested on August 21, 1941, while in East London after a return from Australia and officially confiscated, finally by the South African government in April 1942 or September 22, 1942, as a prize of war, Finland having sided with the Axis. The ship was used by the South African Railways and Harbour Administration for cargo during the war, then sold to private citizens of South Africa, in 1946 to Lawhill Limited, East London, and in 1947 to Thomas Worker and Herman Olthaver, Johannesburg, for the sum of £9,000, who used Lawhill on several voyages to Argentina with coal and returning with a cargo of wheat. In November 1947, she sailed from Lourenço Marques under the command of Captain Madry A. Lindholm to Port Victoria in ballast and returned to Beira, Mozambique, with a cargo of wheat. This was in fact her last long voyage at sea. Showing signs of deterioration, she was sold to Marcio da Silva Jr. of Lourenço Marques and arrived there after a short voyage of 500 nautical miles from Beira with great ceremony in September 1948. However, the necessary repairs were beyond the means of her new owners, and she was laid up in the Tembe River, where she rotted anchor for many years. After a last transfer to Joaquim Fernandez Coelho, the old ship was finally broken up for scrap sometime in the late 1950s.